was in 1971. I think at that point Israel made the most fateful decision in its history. What happened is that there was an international negotiator, UN negotiator, Gunnar Yarin, and he proposed to both Egypt and Israel a settlement. The settlement was that Israel should withdraw from the occupied territories. The crucial one was the Egyptian Sinai. And in return, Israel would get a full peace treaty from Egypt. And the president of Egypt, Sadat, agreed to that. If Israel had accepted it, any security problems would have been gone. Egypt is the only significant military force in the Arab world. So they have a choice. It didn't mention, there was nothing mentioned about the Palestinians, incidentally, just refugees, nothing about national rights. That was normal at the time. There was also a mention of other occupied territories, but it was perfectly obvious that Sadat only cared about the Egyptian territories. So there was a possibility of having essentially total security, but at the cost of expansion. At that time, Israel was expanding into the Egyptian Sinai, a big development project. They want to establish a big city, Yamit, on the Mediterranean, a lot of settlements, and they just had to decide, do we want security or do we want expansion? And they decided on expansion, rejected the Yarin proposal. The important question, as always, is what's the U.S. going to do? There was a split inside the U.S. government. The State Department wanted to accept it. In fact, it was almost identical to official U.S. policy. Henry Kissinger was the National Security Advisor. He was engaged at the time in an internal bureaucratic battle with the State Department. He wanted to take total control of foreign policy, kick the State Department out. So if Secretary of State said it's raining, Kissinger would argue that the sun's shining. And since the State Department supported it, he opposed it. I presume that's the reason. And he even gave his reasons. And he had that goal to actually present them in his memoirs 8 years later. He said that we have to keep to a policy of what he called stalemate. No negotiations, just force. And we have to keep to that until some Arab state breaks relations with the Soviets and stops supporting the Maximum Arab Program. It's an astonishing comment. It reveals an ignorance of international affairs which is almost spectacular. I mean, Saudi Arabia, the major Arab state, never even had relations with the hated Soviet Union. They couldn't break with them. Egypt, the other major state, was openly calling for, in fact, kicked out the Russian advisors and was calling for a settlement. But it didn't matter. That was necessary and it was done. Well, that's one of the most important decisions in U.S.-Israeli history, and it set the pattern for what's happened since. Security is downplayed in favor of expansion. That did have consequences. It led to the 1973 war. The 1973 war was a real catastrophe. Israel was literally on the verge of destruction. There was threats of nuclear weapons. The United States called a nuclear alert to try to make sure that nobody interfered. It was a very dangerous situation. And it did have an effect. Kissinger and the government of Israel recognized that Egypt just isn't a basket case. You can't just ignore them. So you got to accommodate them somehow. And that led to the famous shuttle diplomacy, ultimately to the Camp David agreements in 1978-79, when Israel essentially agreed to evacuate the Sinai. Actually, it agreed under terms that were much harsher from the U.S.-Israeli point of view than the ones that Sadat offered. Because by 1979, the Palestinian national rights had entered the international agenda. So Israel and the United States had to at least formally accept wording that said that Palestinian national rights would be accepted. So from their point of view, the U.S.-Israeli point of view, it was a diplomatic defeat, actually a catastrophe. But it's hailed as a diplomatic triumph. By definition, anything we do must be a diplomatic triumph. Meanwhile, Palestinian national rights had reached the international agenda. In 1976, there was a Security Council resolution proposed by the major Arab states, called confrontation states, Syria, Egypt, and Jordan, calling for a two-state settlement on the international border and then they used the wording of UN 242, which everyone, formally at least, accepts as the major document, recognition of the rights of every state in the region to live in peace and security within secure and recognized borders. U.S. vetoed it. The U.S. is way in the lead in vetoing resolutions in the Security Council since the mid-60s, when the world kind of got out of control as a result of decolonization. Britain is second, nobody's even close. But when the U.S. vetoes a resolution, it's a double veto. It doesn't happen, and it's vetoed from history. So no one knows about this. There was a similar one in 1980. Again, I say Europe has a lot of responsibility for this. If it wasn't for European complicity and obedience, couldn't get away with it. Well, it continues. I won't run through the full record. The most recent case is February 2011. It's Obama. He vetoed a Security Council resolution. The veto was so extreme, it actually did get a little bit of attention and raised a few eyebrows. The Security Council resolution called for implementation of official U.S. policy. It called for an end to expansion of settlements. That's official U.S. policy. But Obama vetoed it, which tells you how much the official policy means. Meanwhile, lots of other things had been happening. In 1988, the Palestinian National Council formally accepted the two-state settlement. They supported it before. And of course, the U.S. and Israel had to respond to that. And the response is quite interesting, but it's kind of wiped out of history too, but you can find it. Israel responded right away by saying that there cannot be a second Palestinian state between Israel and Jordan, meaning Jordan is a Palestinian state. We declare that. Palestinians and Jordanians don't know about it, but it doesn't matter. So there can't be another Palestinian state. And the fate of the territories, they said, has to be settled in accordance with the guidelines of the government of Israel. It's May 1989. Well, as always, the question is, what's the United States going to do? That was the Bush #1 administration, the kind of civilized Bush. And James Baker was the Secretary of State. And he produced a plan called the Baker Plan, which simply endorsed the Israeli position, totally. So the U.S. said there can't be another Palestinian state, and the fate of the territories has to be settled in accord with the guidelines of the government of Israel. He did add something. He said that Palestinian negotiators can take part in negotiations if they accept this position. Now, that's the only part of that this Baker Plan has ever been mentioned, and it's been mentioned to show how forthcoming we are, willing to accept Palestinian negotiators. Well, then comes the Iraq War, and the Bush administration did initiate negotiations, the Madrid negotiations. They didn't get any. The Palestinian delegation was led by Haider Abdel-Shafi. He's probably the most respected person in the occupied territories, an honest, non-corrupt nationalist, very good reputation. And he refused to sign on to the U.S.-Israeli position. which insisted that settlements must continue in the occupied territories, and he wouldn't agree to that. Well, at that point, Norway stepped in. There was a conflict at the time between the Palestinians inside the territories and the ones that were called the Tunis Palestinians, the official PLO, Arafat and his clique. They were being marginalized. In fact, they were on the verge of being thrown out. This is a result of the First Intifada, a lot of local activity. Norway intervened and organized the Oslo Agreement. That offered Arafat a kind of an end run around the internal Palestinians, and it enabled him to return to Palestine as the official leader with a lot of foreign support and money and so on, and to settle with the U.S. and Israel, accepting their position. So you take a look at the proposals that came out of Oslo. There was what was called the Declaration of Principles. That was the main. It's only about 3 pages long. You can pick it up on the internet or read it in dissident literature, because it's never mentioned. The Declaration of Principles specifies the final outcome of negotiations. They're leaning